Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this article from the front page of the Delhi edition. According to the article, the center is unlikely to allow the return of four Kerala women who had joined the Islamic State in Afghanistan. See, back in 2016, a group of 21 men, women, and children from Kerala had become self radicalized and self indoctrinated with the radical ideology of Islamic State, and they had traveled to Afghanistan to fight for ISIS K or the ISIS Khorasan province. And over the last few years, most of these ISIS terrorists were killed, particularly the husbands. And while some of them were killed in a US drone strike in Afghanistan, a few others had died during terror attacks that were committed by the ISIS K or the ISIS Khorasan province. So today, four of these women are left alive, and back in 2019, a large batch of ISIS fighters and terrorists surrendered before the Afghan authorities. The head of the Afghan intelligence, the National Directorate of Security or the NDS, has informed that more than 400 such members have surrendered, and out of them, four are Indian nationals who happen to be the wives of ISIS terrorists who left from Kerala as a part of this batch. So now that these ISIS terrorists have surrendered, the Afghan authorities are dealing with the problem. And as these members come from 13 different countries, including China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Maldives, and India, the Afghan government is trying to deport them back to their home countries. So now, the government of India, just like the governments around the world, are left to deal with this challenge of accepting the terror returnees or ISIS returnees, and governments around the world are struggling to come out with a policy to deal with them. See, ISIS K or ISIS Khorasan is seen as a branch of the Islamic State, which rose to power in 2014 in the Levant region, that is, in the Iraq Syria region, after its leader Abu Bakr al Baghdadi declared the creation of a so called Islamic Caliphate. Very quickly, the ISIS gained geographical control over large parts of Iraq and Syria, and as it declared the establishment of an Islamic Caliphate over here, its ideology became very popular on the internet, especially on social media, and immediately this ideology started generating a global appeal. So, from countries around the world, several youth, even educated youth, started falling prey to this radical ideology, and many of them became self radicalized and self indoctrinated. And including from India, hundreds of radicalized men and women from around the world traveled to Iraq and Syria, especially through Turkey, and they would cross over the border over here and enter the Islamic State region in order to join the ranks of the ISIS and fight on behalf of the ISIS. So from 2014 itself, India started feeling the impact of the growing popularity of ISIS ideology, especially on internet and social media platforms. And Indian intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, and as well as the state police organizations, they had to deal with several self radicalized youth who were looking to travel to Turkey in order to sneak into Iraq and Syria. Then, a branch of ISIS was established known as ISIS K or the ISIS KP, which stands for Khorasan province, that was centered around Afghanistan. The objective of ISIS K was to establish a so called Islamic Caliphate in the Khorasan province that spans across parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and parts of Central Asia. This extremist terror outfit is primarily centered around the Kunar and Nangarhar provinces of Afghanistan, and Indian intelligence agencies have reasons to believe that Pakistan's ISI has backed and supported ISIS Khorasan as a part of its covert proxy war in the region. So, as this branch of ISIS gained popularity, several Indians got self indoctrinated and self radicalized, and they even traveled to Afghanistan with their families, with their wives and children, and they would all enter Iran to later sneak into Afghanistan to fight on behalf of ISIS Khorasan. So now this emerged as a new challenge for the Indian authorities. And the first challenge for India was to deal with the indoctrination and self radicalization that was going on, and to prevent the self radicalized youth from traveling to these countries. The second challenge that would emerge later was how to deal with these returnees who were trying to return back to India after surrendering or after giving up their radical war. And now the challenge for Indian authorities, just like authorities around the world, was the question of how would we deal with them. Should we arrest them and prosecute them as terrorists, or take a more humane approach to focus on de radicalization and counseling? This is a challenge that countries around the world have been dealing with, and the latest case of ISIS returnees from Afghanistan brings up this challenge again in front of the government of India. See, in the initial years, when Indians were getting self radicalized and self indoctrinated, and when they were trying to join the Islamic State, either in Iraq, Syria, or in Afghanistan, the initial approach of the Indian government and the state governments was to focus on de radicalization and counseling in order to prevent them from leaving India. And this was an attempt under India's counter-terrorism initiative to bring back these radicalized, misled youth back into the mainstream. Led by the central agencies, the counter-terrorism institutions of the country, both at the center and the state, would carry out proactive surveillance on social media platforms and on the internet to identify any attempts of the youth to get self-radicalized or self-indoctrinated. They would keep a watch on them, and if they made any attempt to travel out of the country, they would be stopped from traveling, and the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement authorities, along with the local police, would focus on a community model wherein local community members would be brought in along with local clerics. And by using their family members and professional counselors, the government was making an attempt to de radicalize these self indoctrinated youth by providing them with the required counseling and support. And every attempt was made to bring them back into the mainstream. This approach was essentially seen as a soft approach, which was focused upon dealing with the misled youth who could be brought back into the mainstream with the right kind of intervention by the state. Because adopting a hard approach against misled youth would have been counterproductive, and this is a lesson that counterterrorism authorities around the world have learned. Since these self indoctrinated youth were yet to commit any acts of terrorism, the government preferred taking a softer approach instead of a hard approach in order to focus on their de radicalization. But however, the question of returnees is entirely different because many of these terrorists who have fought for ISIS and ISIS K in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, they would have committed acts of terrorism. They would have become highly radicalized, highly indoctrinated, and they would have even taken part in many major terror attacks. So, if such hardcore terrorists are surrendering or if they're attempting to return back, then what should be the approach of the government? Should the government focus again on the soft approach, or would it be the time to use hard approach to take up the case legally, arrest these returnees, and prosecute them, as these individuals might be beyond the scope of de-radicalization? So this has been a very big challenge for counterterrorism authorities, not just in India, but as well as around the world. See, previously, India has successfully tried the de-radicalization and counseling model in various theaters of internal conflict, be it Kashmir-based insurgents or for Northeast insurgents and even for the Naxals. India has always offered surrender and rehabilitation packages through which many radicalized youth who were largely misled, they have been successfully brought back into the mainstream of the society. But the case of ISIS terrorists is very different, and especially with regard to those who have seen conflict in these areas, that is in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, they would be battle hardened, they would be highly indoctrinated and highly radicalized, and there would always be a risk in adopting a softer approach towards them because de radicalization cannot be guaranteed in those cases, and some of them might end up committing grave acts of terrorism after their return. In fact, other countries, especially European countries, have already had a bitter experience with this. In France, Germany, United Kingdom, and in other European countries, several returned terrorists were rehabilitated and the governments focused on de radicalization. While it worked in some cases, some of them were so highly motivated and highly indoctrinated that de radicalization attempts had failed. And as the government and the intelligence agencies lost sight over them, they would go on to commit grave acts of terrorism on European soil. Because running such a de radicalization program on a large scale and constantly keeping a check on hundreds of terrorists would become a very laborious task, and it would require enormous focus and resources to maintain constant surveillance on these returnees in order to ensure that the government and the law enforcement agencies do not lose sight over them. So, following these incidents, European countries have adopted a mixed model, but all their rehabilitation and de radicalization models have seen mixed results. And just like these countries, India has also been quite confused with regard to this policy and it has been adopting a mix of soft approach and hard approach while dealing with these returnees. But of late, when India had to deal with hardcore ISIS terrorists who were returning back, India has firmly taken the harder approach, as the softer approach always entails an element of risk. See, since 9/11, the United Kingdom, for example, has been running a de radicalization program which has seen a mix of success and failures in its implementation. The UK model makes use of the local community, and along with the counterterrorism authorities, they provide for de radicalization, where the focus is on preventing and protecting the indoctrinated youth from any further radicalization, and the focus is on giving them opportunities to come back into the mainstream. While the UK model sounds good on paper, it has seen many problems in implementation, and a few of these radical elements, who are a part of the de radicalization program, have slipped past surveillance and have even committed few acts of terrorism against British targets itself, which highlights the failure of this program as well. Then, even countries like Singapore and Saudi Arabia have tried their own de radicalization models. But again, these strategies have only seen limited success, and it is almost impossible to guarantee that a de radicalized person will never commit any act of terror thereafter. So, in this context, India in particular is looking at the French model to deal with ISIS returnees. Because after having several bitter experiences with de radicalization, France has adopted a unique model wherein it has stopped accepting the returnees, and it has basically blocked the channel for deportation from the countries where they have been arrested or surrendered. Instead, France will work with that country and push those governments where they have surrendered to prosecute them within their legal system using their courts and judiciary. In India as well, state police organizations have tried a de radicalization model for ISIS returnees with the help of the central government. For example, the Maharashtra ATS and the Kerala State Police have run such de radicalization program, and particularly Kerala, under its Operation Pigeon, saw a lot of success in dealing with self indoctrinated youth within the country. It even managed to prevent many misled youth from getting further radicalized and from further traveling to these conflict zones. But however, Indian agencies have had very limited experience in dealing with terror returnees, and those who have returned, especially the hardcore terrorists, they have been dealt with the hard approach. They've been arrested by the Indian authorities, and India has taken up prosecution against them in some cases. So now, in the light of this development, where four women IS terrorists who were highly indoctrinated have surrendered in Afghanistan and the Afghan government is trying to deport them back into India, India has again been left to deal with this challenge. According to reports, the current thinking within the government is that we need to follow the French model, where we stop their deportation, where we will not accept them back into the country, but instead push Afghanistan itself to prosecute them within their legal system. Next, on page number 7, we have a column which examines the plight of Pakistan's persecuted minorities, especially Pakistani Hindus, who have migrated into India. See, with rising majoritarian fundamentalism in Pakistan, all the religious minorities have been targeted and persecuted, including the Hindus, the Sikhs, Christians, and Buddhists. As Pakistan embraced a radical version of Sunni Islam, even other sects within Islam have been targeted and persecuted, including the Shias, the Sufis, Ahmadiyas, Hazaras, etc. So, Pakistani Hindus in particular have been at the receiving end of this targeted persecution, which is a direct result of the embrace of radicalism and majoritarianism by the Pakistani state. So, with regard to Pakistani Hindus, we have witnessed three waves of migration into India. One, of course, during the 1947 partition, and the second was during the 1971 liberation of Bangladesh war, when Indian forces had strategically occupied several areas of West Pakistan. Then, during the 1990s, when South Asia witnessed political and communal turmoil, a wave of migration took place from Pakistan into India. The Ram Janmabhoomi movement in India and the demolition of Babri Masjid by Hindutva extremists triggered a backlash in Pakistan where Hindu minorities were targeted, and this resulted in a wave of migration into India. Then, parallelly in Afghanistan, the country had fallen into the hands of the Taliban, and in this environment of radicalism and majoritarianism, several minorities in Pakistan were also targeted, including the Pakistani Hindus. So through the 1990s, India again witnessed a wave of migration from Pakistan. So overall, a few thousand Pakistani Hindus have crossed over the border either legally or illegally, and they have entered into India, and most of them are settled in Rajasthan and as well as in Gujarat, which are the border states. These migrants who have come into India, they have been seeking political asylum as they have faced religious persecution in Pakistan, but officially they haven't been given the refugee status by the Indian government, as India is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention. India has neither signed the 1951 UN Refugee Convention nor have we signed the 1967 protocol to it. So, without officially being recognized as refugees, these migrants cannot access any basic services in India, and hence, for them, the only route for accessing basic essential services is to gain Indian citizenship. For ensuring their food security, for accessing education, healthcare, and even for their livelihood and employment opportunities, gaining Indian citizenship is the only route for Pakistani migrants in order to protect and secure their basic well being. So, as per the provisions of the Citizenship Act of 1955, a few migrants have acquired Indian citizenship through the process of naturalization. I hope you know that under this provision, a person can acquire Indian citizenship if he or she is ordinarily resident of India for a period of 12 years. That is a total of 11 years in aggregate and throughout 12 months preceding the date of application. So those who fulfill this condition can apply for Indian citizenship under this act through the route of naturalization. Through this route, a few Pakistani migrants, a few Pakistani Hindus have gained Indian citizenship, but still a large number of them are stateless. See, the foreigners in India, that is all of them, including asylum seekers, they are regulated under these laws. One, of course, is the Citizenship Act. Then we have the Foreigners Act of 1946, the Registration of Foreigners Act of 1939, and the Passport Entry to India Act of 1920. Under these laws, the central government acquires the powers to detain foreigners if required, to deport them back to their country of origin, or even to restrict their movement within the country. And these foreigners, including asylum seekers and illegal migrants, they do have few routes available for them to gain Indian citizenship. But however, the problem is that many of these migrants are poor, they're illiterate, and as a result, they are stuck with a maze of rules and regulations. And this includes not just the ones that have been framed by the Indian government, but also the ones that have been framed by the Pakistani government, which is implemented here by the Pakistani High Commission. There is a laborious, complex process that these migrants will have to go through before they can apply for Indian citizenship and gain Indian citizenship. See, many of these migrants have entered India illegally, but some of them have even entered India on long-term visas. These migrants, they have fled persecution, and in many cases, their families are divided. And since they are desperate to gain Indian citizenship, they are conveniently exploited by several middlemen, agents, and even by government officials. They often extract bribes and they are even made to cough up hefty fees while getting their applications filed and processed. See, from the Indian government, they face several challenges before they can acquire Indian citizenship. First, they have to satisfy the condition of having stayed in India for a certain number of years to keep their registration permit that has been given by the Foreigners Regional Registration Office. So this again involves a lot of processes. They have to navigate a lot of rules and regulations, and they have to keep paying the renewal fees. Especially for the renewal of their long term visas, they have to pay a hefty fee. And despite having all these Indian documents, these migrants they need to possess an unexpired Pakistani passport if they have to apply for Indian citizenship. So, for this purpose, they have to travel to New Delhi, where the Pakistani High Commission is located, and again pay a hefty fees and navigate the complex rules and regulations of the Pakistani government in order to retain their passport. All these complexities have doubled the plight of migrants who are already struggling to access basic services in India. These migrants have been hopeful about the route that has been created through the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which has run into a lot of controversy. But recently, the Ministry of Home Affairs brought out a notification just a few weeks back through which it has delegated certain powers under the existing Citizenship Act to district collectors in 13 specified districts, particularly in Rajasthan and Gujarat, which have a considerable Pakistani Hindu migrant population. As per this provision, the district collectors of these 13 specified districts, they have been given the powers by the MHA to grant citizenship to Pakistani Hindu migrants who are found in their respective districts. This notification that has been brought out by the MHA in May 2021 is not just applicable to Pakistani Hindu migrants, but it is also applicable to all non-Muslim migrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. While the collectors of Jodhpur, Jaipur and Jaisalmer districts were empowered to grant citizenship back in 2016 itself, the new notification has now delegated the same powers to collectors of other districts such as Udaipur, Barmer, Jalore, etc. But however, the delegation of these powers has also triggered a major controversy because civil society activists have criticized the government of India for trying to implement the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act through stealth and through disguise by delegating such powers under the existing provisions to district collectors. See, under the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act, the rules are yet to be framed and notified by the government. This Amendment Act ran into a major controversy in 2019 and 20 because it provides for discrimination on the lines of religion and selectively provides citizenship to certain communities while excluding the others. So on these lines, this Amendment Act has been challenged in the Supreme Court. So these factors have delayed the implementation of the Amendment Act, and the MHA is yet to notify these rules under the new Amendment Act. So civil society activists have alleged that the government is trying to implement those provisions by stealth, by expanding the existing powers of district collectors in few districts to other districts as well, through which citizenship is being granted only to Pakistani Hindu migrants. So all these controversies, along with the difficulties created by the pandemic, has further increased the plight of the Pakistani Hindu migrants in India. And as a result of politicization and communalization of this issue, and due to the complex rules and regulations of the two governments, hundreds of Pakistani Hindu migrants have been left stateless for several years. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. According to this article, the central government, that is the Ministry of Education, has set up a dedicated online module in order to map out the disruption that has been caused to education as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Education Ministry has directed the state governments to immediately upload all data on out-of-school children on this new online module in order to track and monitor children who dropped out of the schooling system at the block level. With this, the center is trying to get an accurate estimate of the disruption caused by the pandemic and understand as to how many children have dropped out of the schooling system. This data will facilitate the center and the state governments to provide for appropriate admission for out-of-school children in the age group of 6 to 14 years, for whom right to education is guaranteed as a fundamental right. And the center along with the states will make every attempt to bring them back into regular schooling system. For this purpose, adequate financial allocation will also be made under the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan in order to arrange for special training to act as a bridge course in order to plug the gaps in their education and bring these out-of-school children back into mainstream schooling system. Through this online module, the out-of-school children will be mapped with the nearest special training centers at the block level in order to provide these bridge courses. And this would help in bringing back children in the age group of 6 to 14 years back into the schooling system. And for those out-of-school children in the age group of 16 to 18 years, separate financial assistance is being made available if they belong to socially and educationally disadvantaged groups, so that they can make use of this financial assistance to continue their education through open learning or through distance learning. The Education Ministry has also directed the state governments to conduct a comprehensive door-to-door survey to identify children who are out of school and to identify the number of migrant students whose education has been disrupted as a result of the pandemic. Based on this real-time assessment, the center and the states will work out an action plan to prevent further dropouts and to increase enrollment and to bring back out-of-school children back into the formal education system. Next, we have an article on page number 13, according to which the China Sri Lanka Friendship Hospital has been opened in Polonnaruwa, which is located in the north central province of Sri Lanka. This hospital has been built with a Chinese grant of $60 million and it specializes in treating kidney related ailments. This hospital has been specifically set up at this location as the farmers of this region suffer from several kidney related disorders, including the chronic kidney disease of unknown etiology, for which the causative factors is yet to be determined. A few years back, former Sri Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena had requested for this assistance from China, and accordingly, China allotted a grant to Sri Lanka to build this hospital. And with its inauguration, it becomes one of the largest such hospitals in South Asia for nephrology care. So, the inauguration of this project displays the rising soft power influence of China in Sri Lanka through its large investments. And in the past as well, China has made many such investments in creating necessary public spaces or public infrastructure in Sri Lanka. For example, China has invested in the creation of conference halls and theatre facilities in order to nurture its soft power image. Over the last 2 decades, China has emerged as the key investor in Sri Lanka, and apart from having invested billions of dollars in strategic and commercial projects, it has even provided for a currency swap facility of $2 billion to help out Sri Lanka overcome its debt burden. Apart from raising its soft power through such investments, grants, and loans, China has also invested heavily in strategic commercial projects such as the Hambantota port, the Matala airport, and as well as the transshipment container terminal at the Colombo port. It has even invested in many other infrastructure projects, including construction of road and rail networks, communication towers, and as well as in power plants and renewable energy projects. Recently, following the request of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, China even granted a $90 million donation to Sri Lanka in order to help out the country whose finances has come under a lot of strain as a result of the pandemic. In comparison, India has granted a total assistance of around $570 million to Sri Lanka, and even India has invested in several important projects, including the Northern Housing Project, through which India built around 50,000 houses to rehabilitate the internally displaced people who were uprooted from their homes during the Sri Lankan Civil War. Plus, India has also helped Sri Lanka in reconstructing several of its projects which were damaged during the tsunami and during the Civil War. And India has helped rebuild key projects such as the Northern Railway Track, the Palale Airport, the Kake Senturai Port, etc. Then, as an extension of its soft power initiatives, India has built a cultural center at Jaffna with a total assistance of $11.5 million. But this project has been completed and it is yet to be inaugurated. And this delay in inaugurating the Indian project is a result of the dispute that has emerged between India and Sri Lanka over the administration of this cultural center. So, in short, this article sheds light over the ongoing strategic competition between India and China to gain influence in Sri Lanka through their investments and projects. Now, let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: ISIS returnees could pose a problem to India. Examine India's policy in this regard. The second question: hundreds of Pakistani minorities who have migrated to India in search of security and citizenship are caught in a maze of rules and regulations that have left them stateless for years. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. Now, before we conclude, we have a small announcement. Tomorrow, that is the 13th of June, we shall be hosting a free online UPSC workshop on the preparation strategy needed for beginners. And the session shall be hosted by Mukesh Jha sir. The session begins at 11 a.m. tomorrow. So those who are interested can register through the link that shall be provided in the description box below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.